My boyfriend dumped me over red flags his best friend made up. He begged to return, but I made him confront her before cutting him off. I, 23F, had been with my boyfriend Eric, 24M, for about 8 months. Eric had never had a long-term relationship before, and most of his ex-girlfriends were flings that lasted only 3 or 4 months. Naturally, I loved to believe that this relationship was meaningful for him. But a few days ago, I discovered that may not be the case. Eric's best buddy, Olivia, 24F, has been his neighbor for more than 14 years. They met when they were 10 years old and have remained inseparable since. They attended the same school, college, and now work in the same place. When I say best friend, I mean it. Eric never does anything without consulting Olivia first. Even the decision to date me was not totally his own. He later told me that every lady he'd ever dated had to get Olivia's approval first. If Olivia asked him to end the relationship, he would. I believe this explains why his previous relationships failed. Eric only told me about this 4 months into our relationship, stating he believed it was time. I had already become strongly attached to him, so I chose to stay. Yes, I understand. Bad decision. If I had known about his unusual need for Olivia sooner, I would not have gone on a first date with him. My relationship with Olivia wasn't terrible, at least not until recently. Olivia and I met numerous times, and while we were polite, I had the impression she wanted to quietly show me that Eric would always be hers first. When it was just the 3 of us, she made me feel alienated and uncomfortable. Initially, I made every attempt to befriend her, but my efforts were futile. It appeared that she had already made up her mind against me. To make matters worse, I unintentionally made it into a competition between ourselves. She wasn't going to take it lying down. Finally, around 5 days ago, something occurred. I was feeling quite ill, and because I work away from home, I didn't have someone to look after me. My roommate was on a trip, leaving me completely alone. Normally, I wouldn't rely on a male, but this time, I called my boyfriend and asked him to come over and help me out. He was apprehensive at first, but I assumed it was because he didn't want to catch whatever I had. So I told him it was only a stomach illness and he will be okay. But, even so, he appeared reluctant. I asked him what was going on, and he said he was going to watch a movie and then have lunch with Olivia. He was unsure whether he'd be able to make it. I was already sick and not feeling well, and Eric was prioritizing Olivia over me. I had always understood that if it came down to it, he would choose Olivia over me, but it still hurt. I became incredibly furious off and told him he should date Olivia instead, then hung up. I didn't answer any of his calls after that. An hour later, Eric arrived and apologized for what he did. I was relieved when he arrived because, honestly, if he hadn't, I would have ended our relationship. He informed me that he had cancelled his arrangements with Olivia and even brought me homemade soup. That day, I felt really positive about him. We spent the day together, and by the time he left that night, I was feeling much better. But I had no idea my actions would have ramifications. Eric stopped contacting me the very following day. No calls or texts for the entire day. I panicked a little, thinking something horrible had happened to him. I tried to contact him throughout the day but had no luck. At approximately midnight, he called me back. He talked in an entirely different tone, serious, even upset. After inquiring if I felt better, he suggested I sit down. Then he broke up with me. At first, I assumed it was a joke, but he kept talking. He said it was difficult for him to come to this conclusion, but he had finally understood that my conduct was nothing but a bunch of red flags and that he couldn't stay with me any longer. I was completely confused. As far as I was concerned, I had not done or said anything to him that would have raised a red flag, at least not knowingly. I had always strived to be a decent person and a good girlfriend. This was a major shock for me. I didn't know what to say, so I remained silent as he informed me he couldn't be with me anymore. Then he hung up. The suddenness of it all astounded me. We had just had such a nice time together the day before, and now he was telling us we were overdue for red flags. It didn't make sense. I ended up weeping myself to sleep that night because I couldn't contact or text him for help. After we broke up, he blocked me everywhere. There was no way for me to receive closure or an explanation. Eric didn't even have the decency to break up with me in person, despite how long we'd been dating. He also did not provide a good explanation. For the next 2 days, I was extremely distraught and preoccupied at work and when completing housework. I just couldn't accept that it had ended so quickly. I kept repeating our last few exchanges in my thoughts, trying to figure out what had prompted him to suggest that I had a lot of red flags, but I couldn't come up with anything. The Olivia factor had not even occurred to me because I hadn't seen her in a few weeks and had forgotten how much she dominated Eric's life. Anyway, last night I finally got a call from Eric. I was taken aback because I hadn't expected it. I had just started to digest our separation, so it felt quite sudden. I answered the phone, and he immediately began apologizing. He didn't even give me the opportunity to say anything at first. He sounded hysterical, so I let him vent. He said he didn't want to break up with me. Olivia was the one who made him do it. Apparently, she disliked the fact that I forced him to cancel plans with her and convinced him that it was a red sign. She even brought up a few of other seemingly innocuous things I do to depict me as a giant red flag. Eric said he had fallen for it. Olivia, he claimed, had fed him a series of lies, alleging that I was attempting to build a rift between them and that this was a warning sign. She also distorted things like me preparing meals I like or buying clothes for him that I believed he'd look beautiful in, making them appear as manipulative efforts to control his life. I couldn't believe anyone would fall for such rubbish, let alone break up over it, but Eric was probably an idiot. He then apologized for everything and begged me to accept him back. He claimed he was willing to do whatever it required. My blood was boiling, so I said nothing for a time. I struggled to keep my rage under control. All this time, I blamed myself for the breakup, believing it was my responsibility. But now I see that was all Olivia's doing, and she was most likely fine with it. I should have expected her to try anything to get back at me. After all, I had stolen Eric from right beneath her nose. When I was sick, his decision to care for me and cancel our plans must have made her perceive me as a competitor. She couldn't have it, so she made sure we broke up. Everything suddenly made clear. Eric was pleading with me over the phone, imploring me to accept him back. He even had the arrogance to say that Olivia would no longer be a problem because he would keep our connection a secret from her. I was appalled. Even after all had transpired, he couldn't realize how much Olivia was in charge of his life. If he had broken up with me for another reason, I might have considered taking him back. But I couldn't believe he ditched me over something Olivia had said without considering for himself. Eric was clearly an imbecile. Whether or not he kept our relationship covert, Olivia would maintain control over him, and he would continue to do anything she wanted like a puppet. What upset me even more was Eric's refusal to recognize that Olivia might not have his best interests at heart. He was even willing to hide our relationship in order to keep their so-called friendship. This was a huge red flag for me. I had no intention of getting back to him. I had already made up my mind the moment he revealed the true reason for the breakup. I'd cried enough for this person, and he didn't deserve it, but I couldn't just let it go without trying to put Olivia in her place. That's why I did something so selfish and manipulative, and, while I'm not proud of it, I believe it was necessary. Last night, I told my boyfriend that I would only get back with him if he notified Olivia about his decision and confronted her for controlling his life. He'd have to inform her that she wasn't his employer and that he'd be getting back with me regardless of her. Only if he did that would I contemplate getting back together, because if Olivia humiliated me, I would undoubtedly reciprocate the favor. When I told Eric what I wanted him to do, he was horrified and tried to persuade me to reconsider, stating it was excessive and unneeded. He protested for a long, trying to get out of it, but I was determined. I informed him that I would only respond if he texted her what I had asked. Otherwise, he may say farewell and remain broken up. After a few more minutes of fighting, Eric finally gave in. He sent Olivia those texts and even provided me with a screenshot as proof. I instantly hung up and blocked him. I knew it was petty and cruel, but I couldn't help it. I'd been upset over the past 3 days about our breakup, and this was the least I could do to feel some sense of justice. Aita? Am I the asshole for forcing Eric to send Olivia those texts, especially since I had no intention of responding in the first place? Update 1. It's been 2 days since I spoke with Eric, and he hasn't been able to reach me since. Olivia is unable to contact me since I have also blocked her. I initially felt awful about what I forced Eric to do, but after reading the replies below, I realize I don't have a good reason to feel that way. Eric had a choice, and he chose to send Olivia those texts because he wanted to be with me rather than her. It's not like I held him at gunpoint. He did exactly what he desired. Yes, lying to him about getting back together was wrong. I accept it, but I don't believe what I did was as horrible as what had happened to me. He didn't think twice before convincing me that I was the red flag in our relationship when it was truly him all along. He did everything his so-called BFF requested him to do, regardless of how it affected me or his own life. He had no idea how bad I felt throughout the time we were apart. I had no answers and started overthinking what I'd done, which just made me more puzzled. So forgive me if I don't feel too awful about what I did. I haven't told anyone about my breakup with Eric yet, but I assume I'll have to start shortly. Only a few hours earlier, one of my friends invited Eric and me to her birthday celebration. When I arrive without him, I will have to explain his absence. I'm dreading that part because I'm not sure what I'll say when people ask why we broke up, especially since we were happy on the surface. I'll have to come up with something, but that's okay. At the very least, I am done with that relationship. Update 2. Hello everyone, it's been over a week since I broke up with Eric. I assumed that blocking Eric and his BFF Olivia would mean that I'd never have to interact with them again. Unfortunately, this was not the case. This morning, I received a call from a number I did not know. Naturally, I let it ring the first time, but when they called again, I responded. It was Olivia on the phone. As soon as I heard her voice, I was prepared to hang up because I had absolutely no desire to chat with her. But then she warned that if I hung up, it would only reveal that I was a coward and frightened to confront her. I should not have let it affect me, but it did. So I stayed on the call. Olivia then went on to say terrible things about me right in front of my face. She called me a variety of names for what I'd done, including a sneaky little liar, and expressed her relief that Eric and I had split up since he was too good for me. Then she called me the B word, which really irritated me, and I snapped. I told her just what I thought of her. I told her she was nothing more than Eric's backup girlfriend and would most likely spend her entire life trying to keep other girls away from him so she could have him all to herself. I believe I struck a nerve with that one because, as soon as I said it, she began fumbling and sounding like she was about to cry. I took advantage of that and went even further. I informed her that she could scream at me all she wanted, but Eric had the option not to send her those texts. It was his decision and he chose me over her. That was the final straw. On the other end, I could hear her start crying. I didn't feel sorry for her because she'd called to make me feel awful. But here she was, crying. I'm not sure if she and Eric are still on speaking terms, but I hope she runs to him and complains about what I said. If they come after me again, I'd love to put both of them in their place and remind them that I'm not someone they can mess with and get away with it. They aren't the only ones who have the right to damage others' sentiments. They need to realize that if they're comfortable handing it out, they should be equally comfortable receiving it. Update number 3. Hey, there. Olivia called me 2 days ago, and the conversation ended horribly for her. Like I stated, I was hoping Eric would confront me about it so I could tell them both off. That finally occurred today. The person who introduced us was hosting a party, and we were both invited. She was unaware that Eric and I had ended our relationship. Eric entered the party about an hour in, accompanied by Olivia. They both appeared ready to battle. I drew my friend aside and recounted the entire issue to her. I even offered to depart early in case things went wrong. While I wanted to cause a spectacle, I didn't want it to happen on my friend's birthday and steal the spotlight from her. It would not have been nice. But my friend suggested I stay. She admitted that she wouldn't mind if we confronted one another at the party because she wanted to see the drama play out in person, especially after what I told her. I had the decency to ignore Eric and Olivia since, if anyone was going to start a fight, it had to be them. I was classier than that. But when it came to teaching them their place, I was willing to fall to their level. Eric approached me about a half hour after they arrived at the party, while I was speaking with another guy. I wasn't flirting, just making normal small talk. I believe he simply wanted an excuse to put me down because he walked up and loudly stated that I had already moved on from him. He then called me a cheater and a phony in front of everyone. Olivia appeared behind him with a malicious smirk. I swear I wanted to slap that nasty smile off her face, but I managed to restrain myself. Eric was spouting crap right in my face, even bringing up the phone call from a few days ago. He said I was mistaken about Olivia being the backup since, in fact, I was the backup and not worth dating. I laughed in his face since, if I recall correctly, he was the one who came crawling back to me just days after dumping me over what Olivia had told him. He'd had his say. Now it was my chance to reveal him and his loving BFF for who they really were. I told him that both he and Olivia were much below my level. He should have counted himself lucky that he could persuade me to date him in the first place. As far as I was concerned, he was Olivia's spineless puppet, and no other woman would want him. At the very least, I was willing to give him a chance, but he blew that as well. Furthermore, his so-called BFF was depressed and insecure enough to want to end our relationship simply because he spent a day with me while I was unwell. She even utilized a new phone number to reach me, indicating how essential I was to her. Honestly, her acts betrayed her insecurity and pitiful nature. They were an ideal complement for one another. I genuinely hoped they got together because no one should have to cope with individuals like them. By then, the party had come to a halt. Everyone stared at us silently. Eric had nothing to say and simply stared at me. Olivia, without a clear response, began flinging expletives at me. She got up in my personal space, plainly trying to get me to punch her so she could retaliate, but I maintained my calm. I didn't even want to touch her. Eric decided to leave when she began to have a breakdown. They obviously did not want to be any more ashamed than they already were. Once again, their pitiful little attempt to humiliate me had failed. Eric had to literally drag Olivia away because she refused to accept defeat. After they went, my friend approached me, told me how awesome I was, and we all laughed about what occurred. We resumed partying and finished the evening on a high note with cocktails and a delicious dinner. I'm pleased with what happened because I got the closure I needed. Update 4. Hey everyone, here's a little update. I just found out that Olivia and Eric are finally together, lol. It's been 3 months since our little altercation at the party, and I guess they recognized I was correct. No other reasonable person would put up with them separately, so they chose to date each other instead. I heard this from a friend of a friend, as I no longer communicate with any of them. As for me, I'm seeing a new guy who is exactly my type. I hope this works, and that he doesn't have a psycho best friend that he hasn't told me about. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.